You think it's okay that a regulator happens to have a Bufficorn on her lap? I think that's totally reasonable, don't you? Great. Well, Tung, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I wanted to ask you, just because of the crowd and the way things are going, NFTs. So from a regulator's perspective, can you give us any interesting tidbits on your thoughts on NFTs?
Yeah, so if you guys are working with NFTs or you want to start working with NFTs, there are some things you want to think about. NFTs are non-fungible tokens, but for securities regulators, we'd really look into whether they actually are fungible. And the other issue that folks need to think about are whether or not you're going to somehow have them fractionalized. So if you have them fractionalized, you can run into regulatory problems. But definitely the regulators are really interested in NFTs right now, and it's definitely on the top of their list.
Cool, so be careful when you mint those NFTs, guys. So one really cool thing that you may, well, I guess you know now, but Tung, you worked for the Ethereum Foundation, or you worked with them, right? And so how did it feel to be on the opposite side of regulators, but also viewed as a valuable contributor to the regulators at the same time?
So I did. Okay. Oh, sorry. So as the first general counsel for the Ethereum Foundation, I was there in the early days, and it was really exciting because, you know, like with any startup, especially ones, actually with any startups, you don't know where they're going to go. I think there was always a vision by the tech leadership, but it's amazing to see where it is now. And when I think back, I think that, you know, a lot of the issues that we were dealing with here now are similar to ones that were percolating right at the beginning. Yeah.
Very cool. You know, something that I'm very interested in, because the Colorado Jam incubator and the DAO associated with it, and a lot of people here are very interested, since Ethereum is basically funded by a DAO. What are your, you know, from a regulator's perspective, how do you look at DAOs that's different from other sorts of organizations and other sorts of ways of doing business?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at a lot of these DAOs or DAOs starting up. I think historically, if you are doing this kind of work, you should make sure you read the opinion of the SEC from 2017 about the first generation DAO and how they actually did find that that DAO was not decentralized enough to get around the Howey test. So if you're doing DAO work, that's something to think about. And I know this later generation of DAOs are more decentralized, but the thing to think about if you're serious about building something out, and you are concerned about regulations, and the thing to think about is that regulators are thinking about two primary things. One is disclosure. So part of the securities market, the way the US market works, is disclosure. That is like explaining the material risks to anybody investing. The second thing is accountability. So if you're doing something decentralized and you want it to pass regulatory, you know, through the regulatory scope, you need to be able to speak to regulators about who's going to be accountable if things go south. And I know, you know, innovators don't like to think about things going south, but regulators do. And so those are the two things that would be the same things anybody working on a DAO really should be thinking about.
So basically, somebody to go to in case you have issues, right? In case legal service, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's right.
That makes sense. You don't want to just send your funds or send your whatever, your work into one and have it just disappear the next day.
That's right. So, I mean, one thing to think about is that regulators and innovators both have really important roles in society. I mean, speaking to you guys, you know, innovators are pushing the envelope. That's what you guys do, and it's important. It's like you guys are race cars, you know, and regulators, on the other hand, are not pushing the envelope. Their job is to protect the regular people who are investing, like your uncle or your mom or your, you know, or your kid who doesn't, you know, who doesn't have the money to lose, but they're interested in being a part of it, and so they put their money in. So regulators are thinking like that. And I think that the industry is only going to flourish if there's some way that regulators and innovators can work together.
Great. Well, one thing that I found very frustrating over the years, and I think many people here do, is that not just regulators, but a lot of people they think all blockchain is crypto, and all tokens are crypto, and they don't like crypto, so they don't like blockchain. They don't like anything that has to do with it. So what can we do to gently help those folks who have that kind of view of the blockchain ecosystem? What can we do to help them along?
The thing that helps the most is use cases. If you have use cases that you can show are valuable and work without really creating too much risk for investors, then that's really, really helpful. I was at a regulator conference recently, and those were the kind of questions that came up. Like, is this just a big fraud? And it's like, well, no, there are so many valuable uses, and that's one way to help move the conversation along. One thing that's really odd with crypto is, like, when you talk about oil and gas scams with regulators, they understand that the oil and gas community is a real one, and then there are scams in it. But when you talk about crypto scams, sometimes people just think it's just all crypto scams. And what we want to do is move that to the same way of thinking about it as oil and gas or any other legitimate market that also has this element to it. So I think that's one way of speaking about it. To emphasize that there is this legitimacy, valuable use cases, but also there is a scam element. There are other unscrupulous people taking advantage of the excitement around this industry.
So that's fascinating. So it's actually the anonymous aspect of it, right? It's even in the name for a DAO, right? But that there's not, that they know that oil and gas, that there are those scams, but since they know that they're legit but scamming enterprises or businesses or whatever,
right,
that somehow they have a way to enforce when there's something against them, right?
I think in the general public's mind, they can separate that out, and within the regulator's mind, they can separate it out, that there are legitimate products and then there are fraudsters. But with the crypto industry, it's been harder. I think there are two reasons for that. One is because crypto is harder for non-technical people to understand, and so there's a fear element that makes them lump it together. And I think the second element is that there has been so many different unscrupulous people taking advantage of the excitement around it.
BitConnect! No, sorry. Yeah, but that is. There are so many different ways that I want to go. But actually, we'll skip and we'll go to something that I think is something that most people don't know. You have had a pretty remarkable career, both in government and in blockchain. And I'm interested in finding, when did you first start thinking about blockchain and thinking, oh, it's not all magical internet money and I want to be a part of this?
I think that's a really funny question personally, because I think the first time I started really thinking about blockchain was when I was talking to you in 2012. I think I'd read an article in the Wall Street Journal about arms dealers using blockchain, and I thought, oh God, this is like something, like it's not going to go away. When you think of so much money and so many things moving with it. So I think it was like 2012, probably then.
Yeah, we've worked together quite a bit in Hawaii when she was the commissioner of Securities there, and I ran the internet portal for the state. So we go back a ways. But then, what was it? It was like 2 years before you went on, or 3 years?
3 years before I started working with Ethereum. Yeah.
Ethereum, and you've also advised startups and things like that also, right?
I've advised a lot of startups, a lot of blockchain startups. Yeah, that's true, in private practice. Mm-hmm.
And how, when you're advising startups and blockchain groups trying to get into it, what do you think? Like, what is your role primarily? Now, I know she advised me, so I have some personal understanding of that, but I'm interested in the other ones too.
Well, look, if you have a lawyer who's helping you, I think their first role is to keep you safe enough so that the business can continue. You know, that's got to be right up there. I think. And that's difficult because innovators, like I said, want to push. That's your nature, right? You want to push. And your lawyer's not a regulator, but their job is to keep you out of prison and keep your business going. So I think that's probably one of the number one roles that you have. But I've seen a lot of them, and I know you wanted to know, like, what are the commonalities that I've seen in successful startups? And I would say, as a lawyer, I have a different perspective than the innovator, but the first thing in a field like this is you really need to know your tech. I think you guys know that. Like, this is not an area where you can fudge it. You need to know your tech. And then the second thing is, I think you have to be able to take a hit and pop back up. And then the third is just luck. You know, it's luck. So I've advised a bunch of them, and some have done fairly well. And Ethereum is this incredibly successful one, and I think they had all three elements. Obviously, Vitalik and his team really know their stuff. They could take a punch. You know, things didn't always go smoothly, and they could just pop back up. And they had a lot of luck, the right time, the right place, the right idea.
Great. So I know with me it was like, Russell, I just don't want you to go to federal prison. That was a lot of it. Like, let's keep you out of jail, Russell. That's really important.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think money transmitter laws do have a criminal overlay, so you do want to be very careful with money transmitter laws.
Yes, I took that to heart, and that's why I'm still working for government. So, so as a regulator, you know, now we've got the Digital Token Act. We've got folks submitting their token offerings to you through a form and everything. And like, for everybody here that's thinking about doing that eventually, in some way, shape, or form, what are the key aspects that they should understand before they come to talk to Dora about the token economics or about what they're trying to do?
Well, you know, when I started working in this area, the word Howey test didn't mean much. People were like, I don't know what that is. I think we all know, or many of us now know what it is. And I think because of that, you can do a preliminary assessment of your token to see if it falls under the Howey test. And if it does, it's a security. And then you have to find ways to register it, and you have to make sure that if you're trying to get investors, that you are very, very careful in what you say and the accuracy of it. So I think that's probably the first test. And if, for those who don't know, Howey is a U.S. Supreme Court test that the Colorado has also adopted, and is the law of the land, and it has to do with whether there's an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profit derived by the efforts of others. So that's the 4-point test. There are a lot of other there are other tests as well, and I think you guys have heard of BlockFi. You guys, yeah, and you're familiar with the settlement. So there was a settlement recently with state regulators and the SEC for $100 million on BlockFi. So BlockFi used a different test. They used the Reeves test, and that was for notes. Notes are also securities. So Howey is the one that everyone knows, but if you have notes, you should be looking at the Reeves test. And that's Reeves versus Ernst & Young, a 1990 U.S. Supreme Court case. And for those who... Okay, I'm going to quickly just say BlockFi because I think you guys know it and you're probably interested in it. Just for those who are not lawyers, to make sure you understand, BlockFi was not charged with fraud. They were just charged with not registering. And that's a big difference. Not registering means you have a pathway to register. And I think the regulators really set out a pathway for registration. So there's also a grandfather clause, which means that if you have money and you invested with a particular deal with BlockFi, it's still good. So the regulators said, we're not going to shut you down. You don't have to return any of the money. You just have to register. And they gave BlockFi a path to registration. So what that means is in the next couple months, BlockFi will be the first mover. They'll be the first one to try this path to registration. And I think this is a really big deal. If they succeed, it's going to be really great for the industry. For folks who are doing similar things, they'll know how they can come into compliance. They won't have to live with the uncertainty of whether or not their project will end up being in trouble. If they don't succeed, if they can't register, this will also be a big deal, and it'll probably be quite chilling for the industry. So I would keep an eye out on that, but also if you have an account with BlockFi, it's supposed to be fine with the regulators for now, and you should just know that it's not a fraud action. So I did want to touch on that because it's it's quite a big settlement.
So that's pretty amazing that they're saying, here's a path that you can have, and if they are successful, then there's a lot of people doing what BlockFi does.
I think this is what regulators like myself and a lot of people in the industry have been clamoring for. That is to say, okay, you're going after us for all these things. Give us a path to compliance. And that is what this BlockFi settlement is doing in a big way. I think what's surprising with the settlement, and Heather Pierce at the SEC has mentioned this as well, is that the penalty was so high for not registering. But this is where we are now, and I think it's going to be a really big moment in time for regulation in terms of whether or not the industry can come into compliance and whether the regulators have given a viable path to compliance.
Great. One thing that hasn't been talked about much in the last year or so is banking the unbanked. Banking the unbanked. Oh. Right, and I think that certainly when I was doing like Wampay, cannabis businesses they couldn't get bank accounts, and so banking the unbanked was a really big thing, yeah. And it sort of turned around to becoming unbank the banked, especially in the United States. Where in other countries where banking is a lot more difficult, banking the unbanked makes some sense intuitively, but with all of us, basically when we're looking at banking services that are web only, what's the difference between using them and using an unbank like a BlockFi or something like that? From the standpoint of you as a regulator, I know you're not a banking commissioner or anything like that, what do you think about that change that's happened and what it means to regulators in the future?
I'm not the banking commissioner, but I think in another way of viewing it from my perspective is when you say unbanking the bank, you're talking about DeFi, right? You're really talking about DeFi. And so DeFi goes back to the same two tenets. I don't know the path to DeFi, and regulators keep talking about DeFi, and and thinking about it. I don't know what the path to compliance with that. But again, if you're doing a DeFi project and you are trying to speak to regulators, in my view, the two principal tenets you need to think about are who's going to be responsible if things go south. If all these moms and pops are investing in your project and it goes south, they can't pay their mortgage. They can't pay their hospital bills. They can't pay their college tuition. And so the regulators are going to care about that. And so the thing to think about is, and I know innovators don't want to, but if things go south, how do these people get protected? And regulators will want to know that. So when you're talking about DeFi and you're saying there's no one central, if that is synonymous with no one being responsible, that's not going to work with regulators. I think they're not going to be okay with that. And the second tenet is is disclosure, like making sure that everything you tell the people who are putting money in your project, they know everything, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything. That's a really important part of at least securities regulation. I think banking, but I'm not the banking commission. Yeah. I think we're
Great.
out of time.
Thanks a lot. You know, I think we're over our time, but I hope you all appreciate what a unique experience it is to have the Commissioner of Securities here as a part of ETH Denver, a part of a blockchain, crypto, Web3 event, who's here talking to us on an equal level to say, hey, look, the government is here to work with all of us to make what we're doing possible and to make the world that we imagine real. So please give her a hand. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.